snowfalls on Vardø, Norway, the last place on Earth where natural snow still occurs. Dr. Anika Sorensen, a glaciologist, documents what may be among the final natural snowfalls, knowing it will melt within hours. Children play joyfully, unaware they're witnessing a vanishing phenomenon. Elder Kavi Ikkuma, whose reindeer-herding family lost their livelihood to climate change, watches with quiet grief, calling snow the Earth's way of dreaming. 17-year-old activist Maya Torres live streams the scene to 3 million followers, narrating humanity's loss in real time. From his hotel window, businessman Jonas Dahl calculates profit opportunities from melting ice, seeing new shipping routes where others see tragedy. By the next day, all snow has melted, leaving only children's memories. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ancient ice shelf protecting Vardø begins breaking apart with thunderous cracks. Anika measures catastrophic changes, water temperatures up 3 degrees, ice thickness down to 60 centimeters instead of 2 meters. She explains to Maya's camera audience that the shelf's collapse will accelerate global warming and destabilize weather patterns worldwide. Jonas arrives, arguing that melting ice creates shipping opportunities worth billions, calling adaptation more realistic than resistance. Kavi speaks of Sila, the breath connecting all living things, growing shorter as ice dies. Their philosophical clash intensifies as house-sized chunks calve into the sea. Jonas announces investors will visit to assess shipping potential, while Maya broadcasts the real-time destruction to millions of horrified global viewers. Vardø's community hall overflows as residents debate their town's future. Anika presents data showing the ice shelf will vanish in 6 weeks, making traditional fishing impossible and threatening the town's foundation. She proposes international climate funding for adaptation measures like seawalls and renewable energy. Jonas counters with shipping development plans, promising permanent jobs for 300 people and billions in revenue from Arctic shipping routes that are 40% shorter than traditional passages. Kavi warns against building prosperity on the grave of the ice shelf, invoking ancestral wisdom about preparing for hard seasons through sharing rather than consumption. The heated debate reveals fundamental divisions: survival versus principle, adaptation versus resistance, economic opportunity versus environmental preservation. The community votes 127 to 98 to support Jonas's shipping development plan over Anika's preservation plan. As residents file out into the Arctic night, everyone understands they've chosen fear over hope, embracing exploitation of the climate crisis rather than resistance to it. Outside, more ice calves away, marking time in humanity's final negotiation with winter. Maya found the fox at dawn, padding silently through the remnants of yesterday's snow near the abandoned fishing huts that dotted Vardø's eastern shore. The creature moved like liquid mercury, its white coat nearly invisible against the patches of ice that clung to the shadows of weathered wood and rusted nets. She raised her phone slowly, afraid to breathe, as the animal paused in a shaft of pale sunlight. Arctic foxes had once been common here, but climate change had pushed them north to follow the retreating ice. This one, solitary, alert, impossibly beautiful, might be among the last to call this place home. "Look at this," Maya whispered to her camera, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Sila, that's what Elder Kavi calls her. She's still here, still surviving." The fox turned toward the sound, its dark eyes meeting the camera lens with an intelligence that seemed almost human. For a moment that stretched like held breath, predator and witness regarded each other across the shrinking distance between the wild world and its digital reflection. Anika appeared beside Maya, drawn by the rare sight. "I haven't seen one this far south in 3 years," she murmured, pulling out her own equipment to document the encounter. "They follow the ice. If she's here, it means hope," Maya finished, although she wasn't sure what kind of hope she meant. The fox took 3 careful steps forward, then froze as Jonas's voice carried across the morning air. He was speaking rapidly into his phone, his words sharp with excitement. "Yes, confirmed. Full environmental impact assessment waived under emergency economic development provisions. We can begin site preparation next month." At the sound, Sila, if that was truly her name, melted back into the landscape like a ghost returning to its haunt. Maya kept filming the empty space where she had been, the sudden absence somehow more powerful than the presence had been. "Beautiful animal," Jonas said, pocketing his phone as he approached. "Shame they're so poorly adapted to changing conditions. But that's evolution. The strong survive, the weak become extinct." Kavi's voice came from behind them, quiet but firm. "She is not weak. She is waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For us to remember what we are." Maya's phone buzzed with notifications. Her footage of the fox was already going viral, shared thousands of times in the minutes since she'd posted it. Comments poured in from viewers across the globe, people desperate for proof that something wild and pure still existed in their rapidly changing world. But Jonas was already walking away, his attention focused on the shipping lanes that would soon replace the fox's hunting grounds, the profit margins that would emerge from the creature's displaced habitat. "The investors arrive tomorrow. I trust everyone will make them feel welcome." As he disappeared around the corner of a weathered shed, Maya realized that Sela had given her more than just footage. The fox had given her a choice: to film the end of the world or to fight for what remained of it. She looked at her phone, at the thousands of hearts and angry faces accumulating beneath her video, and began composing her next broadcast. The real battle for Vardø was about to begin. Kavi knelt where the fox had stood, pressing his palm against the snow that still held the imprint of her paws. "My grandfather told stories of foxes that could speak to humans, not with words, but with presence. They carried messages between the world of spirits and the world of flesh."
"What message did she bring?" Maya asked, lowering her camera but keeping it recording. The elder was quiet for a long moment, his breath visible in small clouds. "That what appears fragile may be stronger than what appears powerful. That survival is not always about domination." He stood slowly, brushing snow from his knees. "She has seen many changes, that one. Her kind has survived ice ages and warming periods, human expansion and industrial pollution. She knows something we have forgotten." Anika checked her instruments, documenting the precise temperature and ice conditions where Sela had appeared. "The permafrost here is still stable," she noted. "It's why she could find then sites, why there's still prey. But Jonas's shipping facility will require deep excavation, heated buildings. The ground will thaw within months of construction beginning." Maya turned her camera back toward the empty landscape where the fox had vanished. Her follower count was climbing past 5 million. The footage had been picked up by major news networks, environmental groups, celebrity accounts. The hashtag #SaveSela was trending in 17 languages. "She's become the face of everything we're losing," Maya said to her audience. "But faces can be saved. Stories can have different endings. Tomorrow, investors arrive to turn this place into an industrial shipping port. Tonight, we decide whether Sela keeps her home or whether profit matters more than the last wild things." Behind them, the abandoned fishing huts creaked in the Arctic wind, their weathered wood holding memories of a time when humans and nature found ways to coexist. In the distance, another section of ice shelf calved into the dark water, marking time in a countdown that no viral video could stop. But for the first time since arriving in Vardø, Maya felt something besides despair. The fox had reminded her that even in the face of impossible odds, some things refuse to surrender. "We're going to fight," she announced to her 5 million witnesses. "For Sela, for the ice, for every last trace of winter." The declaration hung in the Arctic air like a promise, or perhaps like a prayer to gods who might still be listening. The helicopters arrived like mechanical locusts, their rotors beating the morning air as they settled onto the makeshift landing pad Jonas had cleared near the harbor. 6 aircraft disgorged a parade of expensive parkas and titanium briefcases, investors from Singapore, Rotterdam, and London who had traveled halfway around the world to witness the birth of a new shipping empire. Maya was waiting with her camera, broadcasting live as the first passengers stepped onto Arctic ground. "They're here," she announced to her 6 million followers, "the people who want to turn Sela's home into a cargo highway." Dr. Chen Wei from Oceania's capital emerged first, his designer boots slipping slightly on the icy ground. Behind him came representatives from Nordic Maritime, Baltic Shipping Consortium, and 3 sovereign wealth funds whose combined assets exceeded the GDP of most nations. They moved with the confident stride of people accustomed to reshaping geography to suit their investment portfolios. Jonas greeted each arrival with practiced charm, his voice carrying across the harbor as he outlined their itinerary. First, we'll tour the ice shelf to assess the natural deepwater access, then a helicopter survey of the proposed facility sites. By evening, you'll understand why this represents the most significant shipping opportunity of the 21st century. Anika intercepted the group as they approached the harbor's edge, her scientific instruments creating a barrier between the investors and the ice. "Before you go out there," she said, her voice cutting through Jonas's sales pitch, "you need to understand what you're walking on." She pointed to her latest readings, ice thickness varying between 30 and 80 centimeters, internal temperature rising, structural integrity compromised by thermal expansion. This shelf is collapsing in real time. Any weight concentration could trigger a catastrophic break. Dr. Chen consulted his expensive watch, apparently calculating how much of his billable time this delay represented. "Miss Dr. Sorensen, glaciologist. Dr. Sorensen, we appreciate your concerns, but we have insurance protocols for site visits. Mr. Dahl has assured us the ice can support our survey." Maya pushed forward with her camera, the live stream drawing comments from viewers who were watching the confrontation unfold. "Dr. Chen, how do you justify destroying one of Earth's last natural ecosystems for shipping profits?"
The investor smiled with practice media training. "Young lady, we're not destroying anything. We're adapting to changes that are already occurring. Climate change has opened new opportunities for global commerce. We can either capitalize on those opportunities responsibly or watch other nations claim them." Kavi appeared from behind a shipping container, his presence somehow making the harbor feel smaller and more sacred. "My people have a word for what you describe," he said quietly. "Wendigo. The creature that consumes everything, never satisfied, growing hungrier with each feeding." The investors exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to indigenous metaphors in a business context. Jonas quickly stepped forward, guiding them toward the waiting boats that would carry them onto the ice. "Elder Ikkuma represents an important perspective," Jonas said diplomatically. "But we're dealing with economic realities. The Arctic is opening whether we participate or not." As the boats loaded with investors pushed away from shore, Maya kept filming. The ice shelf stretched before them like a white highway to nowhere, beautiful and treacherous and utterly indifferent to the billions of dollars it might generate before it disappeared forever. "They're walking on their own graveyard," Anika muttered, adjusting her instruments to track the additional weight load on the compromised ice. Behind them, Kavi stood silently, his weathered face reflecting something between sorrow and resignation, watching the Wendigo feed once more. The sound came first, a deep groan that seemed to rise from the ocean floor itself, followed by a crack like thunder splitting the Arctic air. Maya's camera captured the moment when the ice shelf betrayed its visitors, a section the size of a football field tilting suddenly toward the dark water beneath. Dr. Chen Wei stumbled backward as the ice platform buckled, his expensive briefcase sliding into a widening fissure. 3 other investors scrambled toward their guide boat, but the pilot had already gunned the engine, racing toward shore as more cracks spiderwebbed across the surface. "Jesus Christ!" Jonas shouted from the harbor master's office, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "All boats to the ice shelf! We have people stranded!" Anika was already running toward the rescue boat, her scientific instruments forgotten as training from her Arctic survival courses took over. "Maya, call the Coast Guard," she called over her shoulder, "and keep filming. People need to see this." Maya's livestream viewer count spiked past 8 million as she broadcast the chaos in real time. Comments flooded in from around the world, expressions of horror, accusations of corporate negligence, demands for immediate climate action. The hashtag ice shelf collapse became trending globally within minutes. On the broken ice, Dr. Chen and 2 other investors clung to a shrinking fragment, barely 10 meters across. The water around them churned with debris, chunks of 1,000-year-old ice now reduced to floating rubble. One man had fallen through entirely, his designer parka the only thing keeping him afloat in water cold enough to kill within minutes. Anika's boat reached them first, her voice cutting through the wind with calm authority. "Don't move suddenly, the ice is still fracturing. One at a time, exactly where I tell you." Jonas arrived in a second boat just as the first investor was hauled to safety, hypothermic but alive. His face had gone pale, the confident businessman replaced by someone confronting the raw indifference of natural forces. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "The ice thickness measurements showed it was stable. My measurements showed it was compromised," Anika replied sharply, pulling the second investor from the water. "You chose to ignore them." Maya zoomed in on Jonas's expression as the full scope of the disaster became clear. For the first time since arriving in Vardø, the man who had built his fortune by reading market trends looked genuinely shaken. The ice that was supposed to support billions in shipping infrastructure had nearly killed his investors within hours of their arrival. By the time the last person was rescued, Maya's footage had been picked up by every major news network on Earth. The collapse of the Vardø ice shelf, with international investors stranded on camera, had become a global symbol of climate change's unpredictable violence. "This is what happens when we treat nature like a commodity," Maya announced to her massive audience. "The Earth doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about our business plans." Behind her, Jonas stood dripping and silent, watching his shipping empire sink beneath the waves, along with the broken ice. Within 6 hours, Maya's footage had been viewed 43 million times. The image of expensive suited investors clinging to broken ice while Arctic water churned around them became the defining visual of corporate climate denial meeting natural reality. Hashtag Vardø ice collapse and hashtag Save Sila dominated social media across 6 continents. Maya's phone buzzed constantly with interview requests from CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, and networks she'd never heard of. Climate activists from Greta Thunberg to local school groups shared her videos. Celebrity accounts with tens of millions of followers amplified her message. Overnight, the 17-year-old from drought-ravaged Sonora had become the voice of a generation watching their planet melt. "I can't keep up," Maya told Anika, scrolling through thousands of messages of support, donation offers, and collaboration requests. "Greenpeace wants me to speak at their emergency summit. The UN Youth Climate Council is flying me to New York. Hollywood producers want to option my story." The attention felt intoxicating. The power to move millions with a single post, to transform tragedy into action. But Kavi's weathered hand on her shoulder brought her back to the harbor where real ice still melted into real water.
"Fame is like fire," the elder warned quietly. "It can light the way forward, or it can consume the one who carries it. The spirits choose their messengers carefully, but the message must remain pure." Anika's laptop chimed with emails from the International Arctic Research Consortium, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, 3 Nobel laureates and funding organizations offering millions for expanded research. The scientific community, energized by global attention, suddenly saw Vardø as the perfect laboratory for climate adaptation. "They want to turn this place into a research station," Anika said, feeling overwhelmed by the sudden expectations. "Permanent monitoring equipment, year-round teams, satellite uplinks, everything I've wanted, but now it feels like another kind of exploitation," Maya finished. Across the harbor, Jonas sat alone in his hotel room, watching his phone display a cascade of financial notifications. 3 investors had withdrawn from the shipping project. His company's stock had dropped 12%. International maritime insurance firms were demanding new risk assessments for Arctic ventures. But the economic damage was nothing compared to the deeper crack in his certainty. He kept replaying the moment when Dr. Chen had looked up from the broken ice, his eyes reflecting not just fear, but a terrible understanding that some forces couldn't be bought, controlled, or negotiated with. A knock interrupted his brooding. Maya stood in the hallway, her camera absent for the first time since arriving in Vardø. "I want to understand something," she said. "Help me understand why you're willing to destroy the world for money." Jonas studied her face, not the fierce activist from the live streams, but a teenager trying to comprehend adult choices that made no sense. "Come in," he said quietly. "I think it's time we had a real conversation." Behind Maya, the Arctic wind carried the sound of more ice breaking away from shore,
marking time in a countdown that all the viral videos in the world couldn't slow. Jonas poured 2 cups of coffee, his hands steadier than Maya had expected. The hotel room felt smaller with both of them in it, the Arctic wind rattling windows that framed a view of the broken ice shelf. "I grew up in a house without heat," Jonas said, settling into the chair across from her. "My father fished these waters until the industry collapsed in the 90s. We ate fish soup for dinner because that's all we could afford. I watched my mother cry over unpaid electric bills while my father drank away his shame." Maya kept her phone in her pocket, resisting the instinct to record. This wasn't the confident businessman she'd been fighting. This was someone revealing wounds that money couldn't heal. "I swore I'd never be powerless like that again. Every deal I've made, every risk I've taken, has been about building something that couldn't be taken away by forces beyond my control." "But you're destroying the planet." "I'm adapting to changes that are already happening." Jonas pulled out his own charts and projections. "The ice is melting whether I profit from it or not. Climate change is going to displace millions of people, create trillions in economic disruption. I can either help guide that transition responsibly or watch while others do it carelessly." He leaned forward, his voice taking on the persuasive tone that had built his fortune. "Your voice reaches more people than most world leaders. Imagine what we could accomplish together. Sustainable shipping routes, green energy projects, climate adaptation that actually helps communities like Vardø survive." Maya felt something twist in her stomach, not just the obvious trap, but the seductive logic behind it. "You want to buy me. I want to partner with you. There's a difference." He opened his laptop, showing her foundation documents, environmental initiatives, funding proposals that could transform her from a teenage activist into the head of a billion-dollar climate organization. "You could have real power, Maya. Not just viral videos, but actual influence over policy and investment decisions." For a moment, Maya imagined it. Offices in Geneva and New York, meetings with presidents and prime ministers, resources to actually fight climate change instead of just documenting its destruction. The temptation felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure whether the drop meant death or flight. "I need to think," she said finally. Later, as she walked the harbor in the midnight sun, Kavi appeared beside her like a ghost materializing from memory. "Careful, child. The Wendigo offers many gifts before it devours you. The most dangerous moment is when you begin to believe you can tame it." Maya looked out at the broken ice shelf, at the place where Sela had appeared like a reminder of what couldn't be bought or sold. "What if he's right?" she whispered. "What if working with him is the only way to save anything?" Kavi was quiet for a long time. "Trading your fire for comfort always feels like wisdom."
Until the fire goes out. The Last Winter, Part 9. Part 9. Anika's Breaking Point. The video conference connected Anika to climate scientists in Geneva, government officials in Oslo, and United Nations representatives in New York. On her laptop screen, 24 faces waited for her latest findings, the data that might finally force the world to act. "The ice shelf will be completely gone within 6 weeks, Anika announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was reporting. "Not months, not years, 6 weeks." The response was immediate. Confirmation from satellite data, corroboration from other Arctic research stations, acknowledgement that her measurements aligned with the most pessimistic climate models. But acknowledgement, Anika realized with growing horror, was not the same as action. "We'll need to convene a special session," said the Norwegian climate minister. "Draft new proposals, build consensus among stakeholder nations. Form a committee to study committee formation," muttered Dr. Reyes from the Madrid Climate Institute. Anika watched the faces on her screen, earnest, concerned, utterly paralyzed by the machinery of bureaucracy. "You don't understand," she said, her professional composure beginning to crack. "There isn't time for committees. The permafrost under this town is already thawing. The storm surge protection is gone. People will die." "Dr. Sorensen," interrupted the UN representative,
We appreciate your urgency, but policy implementation requires careful consideration of economic impacts. Economic impacts! Anika's voice rose, 15 years of scientific restraint finally snapping. I've spent my entire career documenting the death of the Arctic while you people debate economic impacts. I've watched glaciers that took 10,000 years to form disappear in a decade. I've seen species go extinct while you form committees. The conference call fell silent. Dozens of bureaucrats staring at a scientist having a very public breakdown. In the background, Jonas's voice carried through the thin hotel walls. Markets are remarkably adaptable. Historical disruptions have always created new opportunities for innovation. That was the moment Anika lost control completely. She slammed her laptop shut, cutting off the conference, and put her head in her hands as 15 years of suppressed grief poured out in ragged sobs. Kavi found her an hour later, still crying in the empty research station. "I failed," she whispered. "I've documented everything, proven everything, and it doesn't matter. They're still going to let it all disappear." Kavi sat beside her, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "My grandmother told me that grief is love with nowhere to go. You haven't failed, child. You've loved this world so completely that losing it breaks your heart. Love doesn't save melting ice." "No," Kavi agreed quietly. "But it saves the person who remembers what the ice meant. And memory, passed from one heart to another, is how anything survives the ending of worlds." Outside, Sila was nowhere to be found. Maya and Kavi found the paw prints first, delicate impressions in snow stained pink with blood. The trail led away from the harbor toward the rocky outcroppings where Arctic foxes traditionally denned, but it wavered, suggesting injury or exhaustion. "She's hurt," Maya whispered to her camera, following the erratic path across the tundra. Her livestream audience watched in real time as they trekked deeper into the wilderness, the comments filled with desperate pleas to find the fox alive. Kavi knelt beside a larger bloodstain, his weathered fingers reading signs in the snow that Maya couldn't interpret. "Struggle here," he said quietly, but she continued on, still fighting. They found tufts of white fur caught on jagged rocks, more blood, the desperate scraping where Sila had tried to dig shelter in ground too frozen to yield. The trail grew fainter as they climbed higher, until finally it disappeared entirely among the granite slabs. "We've lost her," Maya said, her voice breaking for the first time since arriving in Vardø. Sila stood silently, scanning the horizon where dark clouds were gathering with ominous speed. Her struggle mirrors our own. Wounded, searching for shelter, leaving traces of blood in the snow. But the fox knows something we're forgetting. Survival isn't just about reaching safety. It's about finding the strength to keep moving when safety doesn't exist. Thunder rumbled across the Arctic sky, and the first fat snowflakes began to fall.